I've never lost faith, but I mean, you have your moments. I have my doubts. I'll tell you this, Rocky. I remember September of 2011 saying to my pastor, who's married to, obviously, it's his wife. His name's Pastor Allen. I'm not afraid to die. I wasn't afraid to die after I was told I was going to, probably not live the year. And he's like, Boyd, that's not the right time. He goes, I'm glad you're not afraid, but the timing is not right. It's like, oh, okay. He's like, your family needs you. Your wife needs you. Your kids need you. It's not the right time. And so that was literally the moment where I'm like, okay, gotta live.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Boyd Dunleavey, a Richer Soul listener who's here to share his story of hope. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote is from C.C. Scott. The human spirit is stronger than anything that can happen to it. And today, you're going to hear a story of the human spirit that defies the odds. But first, let's review last week's action step. Josh McCallan was on and he asked, "What's your why?" Can you answer that question? For me, it's helping people create wealth so they are free and they're not dependent on others or on government. We can make decisions based on values, not our bank balance. Of course, that's just one why. I've completed a major hurdle of another why, which is being a great dad. I'm not done, but it's a whole new phase as my kids are launched. And of course, being a great husband is another why. Why? Because for me, my wife makes me look better than I am, so I am eternally grateful to her. All these things weave together, and they allow me to lead my family. And hopefully at some point, my wife will join me in my lifestyle business. Throughout all of this, you get to build your financial freedom, which makes for a stronger country, and looking around, we could really use that right now. Today, we have an inspiring story from one of our listeners, and there's a special reason you're hearing it today. Boyd Dunleavey is from Ontario, Canada. He's a husband and a father of And as a father of 3 young kids, he was diagnosed with a nearly impossible form of blood cancer in July of 2011. The family was told that without a life-saving stem cell transplant from an unrelated donor, he had less than a 10% chance of living out the year. Boyd asks, who says dreams can't come true? Boyd asked to be on the show to thank and honor those of you who believed in him, and especially to thank those who served their country. His message is never lose hope. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to Rich Your Soul, Boyd Dunleavey. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you so much.
And I'm excited to learn from you and to hear about your journey. We always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
So it's a funny thing that you should ask that, because people assume that if your mom and dad worked for a bank that you knew about money. But the quick version is that my dad worked for, first of all, I'm in Canada. My dad worked for a bank before I was born. He worked his way up to manager, and he had, in his opinion, a stressful time commuting an hour every day. But he was a manager at the bank. And then actually in 1986, he quit his job at the bank to become a real estate agent, which had an interesting impact on my life, just seeing him take that step of faith. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, my mom actually started with a bank in Canada and worked as a part-time teller. The one thing that I always recall or remember, and the words that did not have a positive effect on me, and I say it with love and respect to my parents, but the words that I try to never say is, "We can't afford that." And that had a negative impact on me. And I don't say that because I'm angry or hurt, but I just remember those words. And that was something that was not positive. But that being said, the positives were the importance of owning a home, the importance of owning bank stock, that kind of thing, taking advantage of some of the perks that the bank gave you as an employee.
And words are pretty powerful. And I don't think we realize how much that we create sometimes the wrong mindsets in our kids when we tell them things like, that's too expensive, or we can't afford it. You're, in a sense, giving them a limiting belief instead of creating an opportunity to make better choices or to figure out how to do things in a better way. So did school or your parents teach you much about money specifically?
So I spent a few years overseas, just traveling and volunteering with an organization that was a Christian organization. And when I was overseas, I actually met my wife in Australia, who was a Canadian. That's a story in itself. But when we moved back to Canada, the first thing that I did was get a job with TD Bank Financial, which has made its way into the US, so some listeners might be familiar with it. But I got a job as a teller with TD Bank, and the things that were, I guess, important to me that I recall even back in 2000, 2001, home ownership. I remember hearing something that was quite profound, that the average net worth of somebody that owned a home, and please don't quote me on this, but it was something like $100,000, and the average net worth of somebody that rented was like $10,000. And I remember knowing that that was important. And so we actually, in 2002, moved from Toronto to London, Ontario, which is 2 hours away. We didn't know anybody here, but we could afford to buy a home. So that was important. The other thing was the importance of dollar cost averaging, buying and holding, holding investments, holding stocks, holding things for the long run. And over the long run, the power of compounding interest and all of those things were set in me, 20 plus years ago.
And those are powerful forces. Unfortunately, I think times always change, and clearly the markets today are nothing like the market was in 2000. That was a whole different time. Markets were at much lower levels, especially after the crash of 2000, and real estate still hadn't taken off like it's done over the last 20 years in the United States. I know in Canada, real estate is ridiculously expensive. I don't know if you're seeing that in your particular area.
So fortunately or unfortunately, Canadian homes are, if they're high ratio mortgages, insured through Canada Mortgage and Housing Co. CMHC. It's sort of like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac is or was in the US. But when the stock market went sideways in 2008, huge crash, the housing prices in Canada were not affected. we had a slight dip. But because of the fact that these regulations were in place, not allowing borrowers to overextend themselves, the housing market keeps moving up. We moved to London, Ontario in 2002 because I saw, in my mind, the proximity to Toronto would eventually cause a demand for houses here in London, Ontario. What I didn't anticipate, Rocky, is that in 2017, so 15 years later, is when it happened. The values of homes in this city pretty much doubled. Now, London is a smaller city. The two most expensive cities in Canada would be Toronto and Vancouver. And you're looking at over $1 million. Excuse me. You're looking at over $1 million for a home there. The average home price in London, Ontario is around $400,000. So still very affordable, but literally the value of homes doubled in the 2017, 2018 surge.
And, you know, for most Americans, those are very high prices.
I guess so.
But, they are.
Everything's 30% cheaper in Canada. You bring, it costs me, $60 US costs me somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 100 Canadian. Every time we go to the US, it's 30% more. So yeah, the numbers sound high, but, for some Americans, it's not that much. If you look at the comparison with the exchange rate. So that's something that most people don't appreciate. But yes, I guess so. I mean, I don't really, I'm ignorant and don't want to tell you what I know about U.S. real estate because I just simply don't.
I understand the U.S. real estate market, and we do have friends and relatives in Canada. So when I go up there and I see how much they're paying for houses and the fact that in Canada, you can't get fixed rate long-term mortgages, I believe.
Yeah, you guys with your 30-year mortgages, that's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. It's wild. So do you mind me asking where your friends and family are in Canada?
They are in Toronto, so their prices...
Yeah, that's the epicenter, man. That's literally, it's like a black hole or a magnet that everything close to it, sort of sucks it in and it pushes up the value of homes. I can honestly tell you if we had moved to, say, Kitchener-Waterloo, which is only an hour from Toronto in 2002, we would have seen that much more of an appreciation or acceleration for the value of homes. But we now we live in the north end of the city and we live in a nice neighborhood. But we have seen people come from Toronto that needed to get out of the Toronto area because they wanted to own a home.
And it's too expensive. Well, and
then the cost of property taxes would shock you guys. It's insane. The taxes and everything here are so much more.
And that's why I don't think people realize everyone says Canada has free healthcare. It's not free. You pay.
Oh my gosh. Can I give a quick tax example?
Yeah.
So my aunt and uncle, he's an American. They moved to the US in 2001. And I said, why are you guys moving back to the US? He was an American. He said, Boyd, in Canada or in the US, the highest tax rate, and you can correct me on this, Rocky, is something like 24%. And you need to be making like $500,000 a year to pay those tax rates. Is that close to being accurate?
The top tax rates, I think right now are either 33 or 38, but that's for over 400, 500,000. If you're at 100,000, they're down in the closer to 20, but it's a graduated system. So you pay X amount on the first dollars and then a different rate on the second set of dollars. And so it steps up.
In Canada, once you start making $60,000 a year, you're paying 43% income tax.
And that's a lot. And you also have some
43% income tax. Then you pay provincial tax. Then you pay sales tax. Then you pay harmonized sales tax. Then you pay tax on the tax on the tax.
Yeah, you guys have a VAT tax. When I go shopping in Canada, it's the opposite. I come there with the American dollar. Oh, that doesn't seem too bad until you add another 18% onto it for sales tax.
Yeah. Value added sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
We had a goods and services tax and this other tax, and they merged it to the HST, which I think is around 13% on all goods and services.
And that's what I tell people in the United States. If you want free health care, you're not going to be able to afford the taxes.
There's nothing free about it. And, it's funny. I've had discussions, debates, lively conversations. I can tell you this, Rocky, if my life had been different and I grew up in the US, I would have had proper healthcare, right? I just knowing myself, if I had to bet on myself. That being said, the healthcare system saved my life. That being said, the healthcare system almost killed me because they didn't have enough beds and my cancer actually relapsed. I don't want to jump ahead into the story, but you wait 8 hours to go into a merge when you've got a sprained foot. Well, if you've got proper healthcare in the US, you won't wait 8 hours for that.
And that's true. It's very regional. So let's kind of take a step back and let's talk about your journey. You were diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you had a 10% chance of survival. Can you share that journey with us?
This is one of those things that you sort of fast forward from 2001, 2002 to Canada Day 2011. And for those that don't know, Canada Day is actually on July 1st in the US. Independence Day is the 4th. And so 3 kids. I was working still for a bank as a mortgage specialist. So it was commission based, work from home, work in a realtor's office. It was flexible. But 3 kids, 6'2", and a newborn little girl, 2 boys and a girl, and just tired forever. And I chalked it up to a new baby, and my wife was tired. And I wasn't feeling well. And 2 different people, my pastor's wife, as well as my wife, were like, something wrong with you. Like, you just like really whatever. You look horrible. And so we were supposed to go on a trip to the US, to Chicago, actually. And because we were going to do that, I went to a walk-in clinic. Well, the doctor misdiagnosed it. He thought I had a virus. So he sent me for blood work. And Rocky, thank God he did, because I got a phone call on the Friday. I think this is a few days. Yeah, it's a few days after Canada Day that changed our life. My doctor, she said, Boyd, you need to go to the hospital right now. There's something wrong with your blood work. I'm like, well, no, we're going to Chicago. She's like, you're not going anywhere. And so, after an entire evening going 3-4 in the morning in a merge where different doctors are coming through, and they're like, we're not sure what this is. We think it's a virus. We think there's something wrong with the water. And they took me upstairs to the cancer clinic. I had no idea what was going on. This is 3-4 in the morning. Go to sleep. I wake up. I'm in the cancer. I'm on the cancer floor in London, Ontario. And they're like, you have blood cancer. And it was shocking and traumatic. It's kind of one of those things that's really weird, because I hate the sight of blood, but I had donated blood over 30 times. And I remember the one doctor talking to my wife. I was so grossed out that they went out into the hall. And my wife told me later that, the doctor basically said, I don't think he's going to make it. And so one round of treatments, they'd call you in and they're like, hey, you're in remission, but don't tell anybody. We're like, well, why can't we tell anybody? This is a month, right? So this is July, August of 2011. And they're like, you can't tell anybody. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, like, you don't tell people that you're in remission because they won't understand why you need to do 2 more rounds of chemotherapy. And so that cancer was so aggressive that you do 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds. And all the different things that happened during this, nosebleeds, chemotherapy-induced brain injury, all these things, it was shocking. And so after 3 rounds of chemotherapy over 3 months, the doctor came into my room. He said, this is AML 6-9. This is the really, really bad one. And like you said, without a life-saving stem cell transplant, you have less than 10% chance of living the year. Now, I don't know if it was nerves or just excitement or energy, but I laughed at him. And he's like, this is serious. You need to take notes. So I wrote it down. And that was a life-changing moment.
And that it is. I mean, I think too often, you're going about life without a thought of care in the world and ready to go on a trip. And all of a sudden, in just that flash, your whole life turns upside down, essentially.
It sure does. The most amazing thing, though, that I will say, Rocky, is that the community here rallied and they did this stem cell drive, which was so cool. it turned out that that particular event saved my life years later. We found out years later. OneMatch.ca or BeTheMatch.org in the US is the International Stem Cell Registry. Now, I don't know how it works, but everybody who wants to be a potential donor, they get swabbed, their name goes into the database. The one thing that I will also say that I've publicly spoken for this organization and about this organization, being a white Caucasian male helped my chances exponentially because different communities, just the stats aren't the same with them stepping forward to put their name in the registry. It's a 1 in a million thing, right? So you get your cheek swabbed, you get a little kit, you send it back in. There's no commitment unless you get the call. But we have friends in the Toronto area that are Jamaican. And so they have said, Boyd, you have to let people know that if you're a visible minority and you're a male between 18 and 35, get swabbed, get in the registry because you could save a life. The other thing that I want to say is for whatever reason, guys make better stem cell donors than girls. Statistically, men on average have a 30% larger bone density. And the other thing that happens, which was really weird, my sister was trying to be my stem cell donor, but as a female, each child that you give birth to, your immune system actually gets stronger, which is not good for the stem cell transplant because you don't want the person that's receiving it to reject it. And so she was canceled out. But the stem cell registry that they did that in September of 2011 is the thing that eventually ended up saving my life. The other caveat to that is because I was so sick, we did a trip to Disney. I took my family to Disney, and that was absolutely beautiful. Disney is the most magical place on the earth. That's just my opinion.
Disney's a lot of fun, and I'm a major stockholder in Disney, so I always appreciate people giving Disney all their money because it's gotten tremendously more expensive over the years. I guess we were lucky when my kids were little. We took many trips to Disney, and back then, although tickets were expensive, they were a lot more reasonable than they are today. It is an expensive event to go down there.
Hey, if you're dying, we stayed at the Polynesian, which is one of their nicest ones, club level. We threw down a few bills to stay there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we're sick. I'm in a scooter. We've got 2 strollers for the babies. My mom's pushing one. My mother-in-law's pushing one. My wife's pushing one. It was like, hey, we went all out because we didn't know if I was going to live the year. But I agree with you. It's not cheap to go anymore.
So what happened next?
We come home. We're like, yay, my life's going to be saved. And then after Christmas, we get a phone call that my cancer had relapsed. That was shocking. That was absolutely shocking. I got to tell you, I felt like I let people down. I don't even know why I thought that, but the community rallied. I actually had a benevolent friend take me to Israel before Christmas of 2011. I had always been a dream of mine to see the Promised Land, the Holy Land. That was so beautiful. Come back and you find out that your cancer's relapsed. What we found out afterwards is that there was a shortage of beds. And even though that stem cell drive in September of 2011 found the donor, they had the donor, and they sat on the file for months. And so the cancer relapsed. And that was absolutely devastating news. Trying to give you the quick version of that would, let me see. God supernaturally delivered me with cancer. I mean, I don't want to get into a lot of whatever, but I got back into remission, which is that itself, Rocky, is like a 1 in a million thing. I mean, to get into remission once was hard, but God delivered me of the cancer, got back into remission a second time. And that's when my wife stepped in and looked online and found this hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, which is near Toronto, because they don't do unrelated transplants in London. We said, we're going to Hamilton, Ontario. So that's what we did.
And then what happened?
And then it was the worst month of my life. It was May 2nd, 2012. It was brutal. I mean, I can't explain to you after going through like 5 rounds of chemotherapy, I thought it was tough. They give you 6 rounds of radiation. They give you enough chemotherapy to wipe out your immune system so that you can take somebody else's stem cell. We did not know at that time where the donor was, but we knew a nurse had to leave Hamilton to fly somewhere to get the stem cells. We didn't know the whole thing. That was brutal. I mean, talking about gums bleeding, talking about in pain, talking about being on morphine. I was on so many different pills. It took 2.5 weeks for the marrow to graft, and it actually worked. And I was still sick. I mean, I don't want to be vulgar or gross, but I'm talking about it coming out of all ends, both ends, all the time. And I had a PICC line in my chest because I could not keep food down. And somehow, by God's grace, they're like, if you can't keep the food down, we're going to have to stick a feeding tube down your nose. And for some reason, that's when I said, well, that's enough of that. So I somehow was able to use the nutrients that were coming in through my chest and drinking these horrible health shakes and all this other stuff. So somehow we got through that. We come home and I'm like, yay. And not even home a week or two. The first 100 days are crucial, right? Like you got to get past the first 100 days or you die. And I remember I was trying to eat spaghetti and something wasn't right, but the spaghetti was like drooping and my wife's like, the entire right side of your face is numb. And so back to the hospital, rushing back to the hospital. Turned out I had a spinal cord injury on top of the brain injury the year before. Spinal cord injury called transverse myelitis, which is nerve damage. And it's to the C3 in the back of my neck and the L5, and my body went numb. They thought it was Bell's palsy, but it wasn't. Anyways, all that to say, all of these huge, horrible, traumatic things. To it was a year's worth, but the month in isolation in Hamilton was just shocking. It was the worst experience of my life. I mean, you're there, you're like it. Your teeth hurt, and that's just the beginning of it. You know what I mean?
It is. It sounds like a very difficult thing to get through. So how do you keep your spirits up in the middle of this? How do you just keep going?
It was a year's worth of treatments. And so there's a lot of stories, but I prayed a lot. I had people praying for me. There were people in our local church. There were people on social media. There were people, boy, do we believe in praying for you. And just finding the little things, finding the little wins. I remember I was so excited, Rocky, to do physiotherapy, where I took 3 steps up this little stair thing. That was one of my wins, 3 steps on a stair thing. They're like, Boyd, you're doing it. I couldn't even imagine, Rocky, years later running the Boston Marathon, 42,000 steps. You know what I'm saying? 3 steps and finding the things and finding people that I could encourage and finding things to do. And I mean, even the simplest, kindest gesture might sound stupid is when you're in a hospital room, you have the option that you could pay for cable. Yay, $200, right? Like they don't even give it to you. And so our pastors were so kind. They're like, we're going to pay for your cable. And I just remember watching the hockey, right? That hockey's always a good drug for Canadians.
When and why did you choose to start running?
Oh, that's a story in itself. So I was determined to try and get healthy. I was determined to not let a spinal cord injury, brain trauma, or all this stuff, whatever. So there's a cancer support group that met at a YMCA in downtown London. And so I was doing these water aerobics and different classes that they had and mindfulness and all these things. And I ran into an old friend and he had the craziest idea. He said, Boyd, I would like to run a marathon for you with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society in Alaska. And so I'm like, yup. So June 2013, it was 7 years ago, Rocky. This friend, he's a pastor of a church here. He works with homeless people. He took his son, my oldest son. We went to Alaska. He ran a marathon for me. And you got to remember the bombs had gone off in Boston in 2013, right? So even all the way up in Alaska, there was security there. There were Marines. It wasn't as intense as whatever. But I just remember like, hey, we're literally in Alaska and you still see people out with, everybody's got guns in Alaska, but you know what I'm saying? And that was the most exciting experience of my life. And Rocky, out of the 7 marathons that I ran, watching my friend do this one was the most exciting because the running is more painful. We got in the car and we were just pacing him from point to point to point, right? And it was so exciting. I literally came home from that trip and bought a pair of shoes and started running. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is horrible. Who thinks that this is a good idea? And June, July, August. So August, yeah. We're coming up on 7 years. I just signed up for this 10K run. 6.2 miles for the American people. And my neighbor, thank God, she lives behind me. She was a marathon runner. You know, the weirdest thing, like when you decide you're going to become a runner, it's kind of like how these runners come out of everywhere, right? It's kind of like, oh, you drive a Volkswagen, all of a sudden you see Volkswagens everywhere. Turn on my chiropractor's a marathon runner, you know, this guy. And so she paced me with this 10K, thank God, because that was just brutal. It was hot too. And it was the weirdest thing. From there, I just decided I wanted to run a half marathon. So I joined a local New Balance. You have New Balance in the US, or from Boston, run clinic, and started running. I was horrible, right? I did these half marathons. I did this 30-kilometer race in Hamilton, which is like the Around the Bay Road race. It's 2 years older than Boston. It's 30 kilometers. A marathon is 42 kilometers, 26.2 miles. And I did that and I said, I'm never running a marathon. This is so painful. 30 kilometers. There was like 30,000 steps. And Rocky, something happened. I met a girl who was a cancer survivor, and she had run 100 kilometers. And that blew me away. Her name's Teresa, here in London, Ontario, Teresa Carrier. And then I saw Meb Keflezighi win the 2014 Boston Marathon. I cried. It was the year after the bomb, right? It was the first meal in 28 years. And I thought, don't be so arrogant to think you're all that when you run a half marathon. And so how did I become a marathon runner? Well, I had run 7 half marathons that year, and it was horrible and pain all the time. In September of 2014, my wife, was just getting tired of me being cranky and miserable. And she said, Rocky, so we have been to Disney a lot. Like by the time our daughter was 8, she had been to Disney 8 times. We got the timeshare. So I know what you're talking about with it being expensive. So my wife says, hey, the Disney Marathon opened up. Why don't you run the Disney Marathon? And I thought, oh, good night. And so I signed up. Training went horrible. It was horrible. When you train for your first marathon, I don't even know how to articulate it. You're not much of a runner, are you personally?
No, I'm a weightlifter, but
okay.
I can't run to save my life.
Right. So imagine just sort of winging it, having these health issues with, nerve damage and all this other stuff, and deciding you're going to run the Disney Marathon. So I'm an enthusiastic person. I'm sure you can appreciate this. I was shocked that, hey, the Disney Marathon is also the charity of choice was the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. Well, that blew me away. I'm like, hey, that's the organization that, a friend ran a marathon for me in Alaska. So I called them up. Like, hey, cancer survivor coming to run the Disney Marathon. I get patched through to this girl in Hawaii. She's like, hey, you've got a great story. So they're like, Boyd, would you be willing to share your story at Disney? And I'm thinking, like in Alaska, they had a room of 200 people. Well, Rocky, was before the half marathon, which is the day before the marathon. I was on stage in front of 20,000 people. So that wasn't intimidating at all. And the craziest part with that is this lady, her name was Bonnie Brooks. She's like, Boyd, I remember meeting you in Alaska a year and a half ago. She's like, I'm the national director of the Leukemia Lymphoma Society of Team in Training. And she goes, I remember meeting you in Alaska a year and a half ago. And she came all the way to Florida. So how cool is that? I shared the stage with that lady. That story in itself, I should have just quit right there, right? I should have just quit there. I was like, hey, perfect. I've run a marathon. I'm done. It was a beautiful moment. And the other thing too with that thing, you're sharing on stage is so intimidating. I had so many people sharing for me, people texting, like people in the running community are amazing. Like, you can do this, you can do this. And then a friend from London, Ontario, the night before the race, I was so intimidated. He goes, Boyd, would you like me to run it with you? I'm like, oh, thank God. He was at Disney too. He was at the same resort, which Rocky, Disney has 28 resorts.
They do. It's a big, massive, I think the whole place is almost 30 miles square.
Right. So how would this guy be at the same hotel as us? It was a sign from God that Walter, God bless him, he ran with me. I couldn't stop crying. You come through, you start at Epcot, you go through all 4 parks, go down to the ESPN thing, and you come back through Hollywood Studios and come in through the back entrance with Epcot. And you came to the English area, which was mile 25. And my friend says, Walter says, Boyd, you're a marathoner. And I started bawling. I'm like, shut up. We still got another mile to go. So I couldn't breathe. And the photos look awful, but I finished it. And, it was one of those moments. It was like, thank you, Jesus. Cancer did not win. I'm a marathoner. And that was January of 2015. And I thought, okay, this is the moment.
This is the moment for what?
That I'm done running.
Ah.
Then Boston. My best friend in Toronto, he goes, oh, Boyd, I think you qualified for Boston. I'm like, no, I missed it by like an hour and a half. long story short, took 10 months to get in, and I tried through 1,000 different ones. But because of my health history, the Boston Marathon in the 1980s has this program called Athletes with Disabilities. And so they did not give an overnight answer. You know what I mean? I didn't call them up and like, oh, great story, come run it. They asked so many questions. And I had to see doctors and more doctors and more doctors and get whatever. But the quick version is that I got in under their Athletes with Disabilities program. And that was a miracle in itself. People are like, you'll never run Boston. So I went 3 times. And, the first year we went, I was so excited. I called the Red Sox and I got to share my story on the field at Fenway with John Farrell, who was the coach of the Sox at the time because he was a cancer survivor. And then my wife's like, you actually had fun with this, so you should go back. So 2017 was amazing. Catherine Switzer, who was the first woman to run Boston, she wanted to meet. So we met in a private media room. But the 2017 Boston Marathon was my fastest marathon at that time, my fastest Boston by 25 minutes. It was amazing. I went from like 11th to the 3rd place mobility impaired athlete and had a 25-minute personal best. But the most amazing part about that, Rocky, is I didn't even do the math until years later. Now, we talk about the 10% chance of living to 5 years or living the year. Well, they said you got about a 30% chance of living to 5 years. Well, it was almost 5 years to the day that I ran that Boston Marathon. What are you doing 5 years later? I had a 25-minute personal best. I was the 3rd place mobility impaired athlete in the top Canadian. You don't think I wasn't singing loudly? And it was funny. I started singing this old hymn. It's an old Christian hymn, Victory in Jesus. And I'm just singing like an idiot. And people are like, what is your problem? Why are you so hyper? You just ran the Boston Marathon. I'm like, it blew my mind that I could have this kind of success at one of the world's biggest races. And that was a pretty special moment. The other thing too, which was really kind of cool, I didn't really touch on this, is I have had Americans come watch me, run with me. I love you guys. You guys have a passion and an energy because being a disabled athlete, you're allowed to guide. So my guide, Michael Johnson, who helped me the first 2 years, was just a random guy I met that weekend at the Disney Marathon the year before. I grabbed his phone. I'm like, hey, we should be friends on Facebook. He's like, who is this guy? And turns out he missed qualifying for Boston by 1 second. So we teased him for years. Like stranger danger, don't talk to Canadians, like I bring a lot of energy. I hope you can see that. And Mike is from New Jersey, just, right across the river from New York. And we called him the Jersey boy. And, he missed. Yeah, so we went twice. The guy that couldn't get into Boston by 1 second, just taking some loudmouth Canadian cancer survivor through Boston twice. So that was wild. That was pretty cool. 7 marathons so far, including Disney twice. We went back in 2018. I did this silly, goofy challenge where you run a half marathon and a marathon. Boston 3 times, Chicago and New York. But I'll let you talk. But all this time, I still had not met my stem cell donor.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man Podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man Podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. And so you were able to do that a year ago. Can you share that story with us?
Rocky, you're a patient man. I'm pretty hyper this morning. So the part that I didn't get to share, this is the part that, I forgot this. My stem cell donor is an American serviceman, naval serviceman named Nathan Barnes. Now, this just, all these years later, blows my mind. This guy was serving your country in Japan. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. I did not know this till last year. They flew him from Japan to Washington, D.C. to get his bone marrow to save my life, to get his stem cells. The U.S. military, man. Like, I served in the Canadian Forces in the early 90s, but, for this guy to do it, just some random guy. It was a 1 in a million thing. That that registry in September of 2011, it clicked. They found this guy. He got the call. We didn't know any of this stuff. We had to wait a year. So here this guy is on the other end. And they said, statistically, 80% of stem cell donors are from Germany because of your, skin tone and all the history and all that stuff. And in Germany, people are automatically registered unless they opt out, whereas in the US or Canada, you have to opt in, right? So we're thinking, some guy from Germany. Well, we find out in the spring of 2013, his name is Nathan Barnes. He's a US naval serviceman. We're like, what in the world are you doing in Japan? He's like, I'm serving my country. I'm like, so we thought maybe the nurse flew to Japan. We didn't know all the logistics, right? So for 7 years, we waited to meet Nathan Barnes. Well, God bless him for serving your country's military. The guy is in active service. He's not, he was 24 when he saved my life. It's not like you get time off. You know what I mean? And so the boat he was on, it went all over the world. But in 2017 or 18, it was repositioned to Florida. So drum roll, this is where it gets cool. So my mom, who's out west, was like, hey, we should meet Nathan at Disney. And Rocky, I've had to repent, but I lied to my mother for 8 months. It's like, oh yeah, it won't work out. It won't work out. So what I didn't tell my mom is March of 2019, it's February, March of 2019, I said to Nathan, hey, we should meet at Disney. No, why just meet at Disney, and why not do it huge? So God bless Disney. I called them up. It took months. This is months. I called them up. Hey, here's the story. Well, I had made connections with some of the people that run Disney. The race director is a gentleman named Stephen Jones. God bless him for putting up with me. I just call him like, hey, let's do something. Let's do something magical, right? Make the magic at Disney. And so I thought my wife would kibosh this thing. She is, yeah. Rocky, ever heard the term there ain't no party like an introvert party because an introvert party didn't start?
I have not, but that's funny.
Her. That's her. I love her. I'm committed. We're married for life. She found the hospital that saved my life. She found online the nerve inhibitor that I take. She Googled it, but never. We got a call. I got an email from this girl, Emily, from media relations at Disney. And she's like, boy, we're so excited. I'm like, yeah, we got to see. And I'm like, there's no way that my wife's going to sign off on this thing. Because, that was the thing. It wasn't just, we'll meet at Disney and isn't this great? Disney's media relations wanted to get the whole thing on video and do a video of this, right? So, yeah, I thought there's no way she was going to sign off on it, but she relented. And so, remember, I'm lying to my mom the whole time, right? Mom, it's not going to work out with Nathan. Don't bug him. He's busy. And she's coming from Vancouver and we're in London, Ontario, which is near Toronto. And we're going back to Disney. Like, we have been to Disney multiple times. And so we get there. We spend the first week there. Seems to be hot in Orlando all the time. We love going in the fall, late October, early November. Here's a plug for Disney because they need the business, Rocky. My favorite time of year to go to Disney is in October, November, because the International Food and Wine Festival at Epcot. I love Epcot. It's my favoriteest place in the world because, hey, in 2015, that's where I became a marathoner. You know what I mean? Cried my eyes out at Epcot. I love Epcot. I love the kids atmosphere, but there's also the adult stuff. Side note, Rocky, when we went in 2013, that's when they had rolled out the magic bands.
Okay.
You scan the magic band. You just charge it to the room, right? It's pretty simple. I remember spending the day at Epcot and having to come back to the hotel. They're like, sir, you need to make a payment to your American Express. I'm like, why? They're like, you exceeded your daily limit of $1,500. I'm like, oops, thanks, Epcot. We blew down I don't know if it all happened that day, but like over 2 days and, just sampling the food and wine at Epcot. I just love that place. Yeah. So anyways, 5 times we've been to Disney in October, 5 times through the years. We've done January. I remember back in 2008, we went in the summer, man, that was hot. So we were planning this trip. The International Food and Wine Festival was capped off with the Wine and Dine half marathon race weekend. Disney has had before the lockdown and all this stuff, about 5 or 6 races throughout the year. The marathon weekend is in January, but the International Food and Wine Festival is the Wine and Dine half marathon weekend. And so that's November 3rd, 2019. And so we set it up to meet there. And so what ended up happening is after a few days, Disney set the whole thing up. I'd never physically met Nathan. Oh, and the other thing too, he had never been to an amusement park. He had never been to Disney. So this guy, God bless him, he's a naval serviceman. First time he comes to Disney, he's meeting the guy that he saved his life 7 years before. Disney got the whole thing on camera, Rocky. Sorry. It was so emotional. The camera crew were in tears. We've made friends with some of these people. Every single one of these 8 people came up and hugged me and said, Boyd, you're a courageous man. And I said, you guys, like, this is the guy. This is the guy. So it happened. They caught it on video. So we got the day at the Animal Kingdom Park. And with these magic bands, we had to go back to the park entrance to get Nathan attached to our things because they gave us these fast pass things for, thank you for doing your story at Disney. You had to pay for everything. So we're going to give you some fast pass stuff. So I had to take Nathan back to the front of the park, right? And God bless my wife who took my mom and her kids to sort of do their thing because I am just hyper. And I'm like, hey, this guy's my stem cell donor. This guy's my stem cell donor. He's a naval serviceman. He saved my life. And so some people are like, thank you for your service. But this one girl at the front, she goes, I think she was Brazilian or something. She's a Disney employee, right? She goes, are you lying to me? I'm like, why would I lie to you? I'm like, this is the guy that saved my life. He's an American serviceman. And she's like, but you look healthy. I said, you have no idea what we've been through. But anyways, so we went on the roller coaster at Disney. You know what I mean? We went on Expedition Everest at the Animal Kingdom. The guy had never been on a roller coaster.
Wow.
I know. And I'm like, hey, we gotta get to the front of the ride, right? We gotta wait. So we're like, hey, can we wait for the front? This guy's my stem cell donor. Like, yeah. So we get the photo of us. Yeah, arms. And the guy had never been on a roller coaster. So all that stuff to say that we did that day. The next day I had to get ready for the race weekend. I had to go to the expo to get my stuff. And so he did his own day at the Magic Kingdom. And, some of our family had to go back and everybody's just doing stuff, right? And, the other thing that's so cool is Run Disney has this guy. His name is Jeff Galloway. He's a former Olympian. He's in his 70s. He's an amazing guy. I've met him there several times. He is their guy. I love that guy. He has reached out to me. He made me his athlete of the week in 2017. Like, God bless Jeff Galloway of the Run Disney family from Atlanta. He just loved me. So I'm there like, Jeff, I'm meeting my stem cell donor. I met him yesterday. So he was all excited and it was really cool. But anyways, I digress. So Sunday morning, November 3rd, 2019. And if I understand, this is going to be like 1 year to the day. I'll be doing this whole race weekend thing. I'm up at 2:30 in the morning. I literally had a camera crew with me, Rocky. I had my own people. Oh, the other thing too is I had tweaked my foot in August. And so I was coming off a bit of an injury. So I wasn't in the best shape, but I was still okay enough to sort of run a half marathon. They had me at the front of the race. The camera's there. They're like recording me. I had a guy on a bike following me the whole way. And the coolest part about that is every mile, you're running kilometers. You got to run 21 kilometers. You're running miles. It's 13 miles, but still the miles are longer. But every mile they're texting back, boys at mile 1, boys at mile 2, boys at mile 3, boys at mile. Like I get goosebumps just thinking about these people that were there cheering me on. Right. And so the craziest part of this story, I'm sorry for the big, long buildup, was I had this stupid idea of having Nathan at the finish line of the race to give me my medal, which I have seen so many stupid ideas because it's Disney and people have crazy ideas. Hey, maybe we could hand you my baby. The wife hands the guy the baby, this idea. And people are like, can't do that. It's dangerous. And Disney has this policy. Nobody is at the finish line. Nobody jumps over the barriers to come to the finish line. So Run Disney had to sign off on this. So the idea was to have him at the finish line to give me the medal. And so I'm coming. And I got to tell you, Rock, I don't know why it was perfect. It was beautiful. I mean, it wasn't my fastest race, but it was still, under 2 hours, which is very respectable for a half marathon. And I remember coming around the corner. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is happening. This is happening. I was getting so nervous and I'm running. I had these gels in my mouth. Rocky, I've never shared this with anybody. It's so funny that I'm sharing this. I spit one out aiming for the garbage can. Well, you never hit, right? It went poof and it landed in the garbage can. And then I had another gel in my mouth. Poof. spit out the second one, landed in the garbage can, and then had a little bit of gel left, right? Poof. Third one landed. It was 1, 2, 3. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful moment. I remember coming, and the announcer says, "This is Boyd Dunleavey. He's a blood cancer survivor from Ontario, Canada. His stem cell donor, U.S. Naval Serviceman Nathan Barnes, is here to give him his medal." And people went nuts. They went nuts. He was there. He gave me the medal. We hugged. We're like, yay. It was honestly, that was one of the most incredible moments. And there's nothing just about a half marathon, but it was a half marathon. It was half the distance of running a marathon, but that was just so amazing. And so we're going around, and, people are, I'm high-fiving people, and I'm screaming and hollering like, your typical Canadian. That's what you think of when you think of Canadians, isn't it? Just loud, obnoxious Canadians. And so we got photos, we did an interview, and we ended up, this is a really cool side note. So Nathan, myself, and my mom ended up having dinner at her hotel, because Disney has 28 hotels. We had to switch hotels. I think it was Coronado Springs or something. Beautiful hotel. And we're sitting there having dinner, and these two people, this lady goes, "Oh, you're Boyd." I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "I'm Jen. I follow you on the Run Disney thing." I'm like, "Is this couple, Jen and Mike from Hartford area?" And so, we got a few photos, and I'm like, "This is my stepson donor. This is Nathan." And so we, that was a year ago. And it was honestly one of those memorable weekends of my life after having all these experiences.
And congratulations on just continuing to keep going and to just charge through with life. And so that kind of begs the question, how has your outlook on life changed throughout this journey?
I had no idea what I could do when people believed in me. I had no idea.
And that's true for everyone.
Yeah.
Because I coach, especially when I was coaching sports, even with robotics, it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. I see it all the time. People they hit their upper limit challenges. And when you can learn that you can break through those things, it's amazing. I mean, and that is the power of having great coaches. And in some of the events that I've went, you go to Tony Robbins, you learn that you can do so much more than you think you're capable of. We limit ourselves beyond belief.
Right.
And that's a shame. And
right.
We can do more than we think possible if we just show up and try. And that is something that I encourage everyone with. You've talked a little bit about this, and you've mentioned it throughout our conversation today. How has your faith been part of this whole journey?
I have gone to church my entire life. I have a personal story of coming to a relationship with the Lord. In the 90s, I have had my moments of faith and belief, and it's one thing. I'm going to tie it back to Disney, because I always tie it back to Disney. There's that song from Toy Story 2, "When Somebody Loves You, Everything is Possible," by Sarah McLachlan. And it's funny, the song just gets to me when I hear it. And, I know that the Lord loves me, but to have people in our local church community, my pastor's wife has been my coach. We never really called it coaching, but we've talked pretty much every week for 7+ years. I mean, she first just checked in because it wasn't doing well. You know what I mean? And so our faith I've never lost faith, but I mean, you have your moments. I have my doubts. I'll tell you this, Rocky. I remember September of 2011 saying to my pastor, who's married to obviously his wife, his name is Pastor Allen, I'm not afraid to die. I wasn't afraid to die after I was told I was going to, probably not live the year. And he's like, "Boyd, that's not the right time." He goes, I'm glad you're not afraid, but the time is not right. It's like, oh, okay. He's like, your family needs you. Your wife needs you. Kids need you. It's not the right time. And so that was literally the moment where I'm like, okay, gotta live.
And it's great that he inspired you. And sometimes that's all we need is just a little bit of inspiration to take that next step. So what advice can you give to people based on your journey?
Never lose hope.
Never lose hope.
Never lose hope. Never lose hope. You know, I have lost friends. I've lost a few friends, the majority of, not everybody, right? Because there's no miracle cure for cancer, right? I mean, there's stories and there's not stories. But I found along the way the general common denominator, those that made it and those that didn't. Ones that lost hope, didn't lose hope.
And I think that's a big reason we have a drug epidemic, because people don't have hope.
Yeah.
And if you don't have hope, then that creates that type of an issue in society.
Yeah, people, just hopelessness. It drains the life out of you. Mental health is huge.
That it is. So we always like to ask for an action step. With all your experiences, what is one action step people can take this week towards living their life?
It might sound silly. I remember the Simpsons line, "Is motivated. Oh, I'm Troy McClure. You might remember me from Smoke Yourself Thin. Get confident, stupid." But I mean, that's just being silly. Believe in yourself. Find people that believe in you. Get around people that believe that you can do whatever, but you also have to know what you want to reach for. So for me, the actionable thing was, hey, I wanted to run a marathon. So then you find the tools and the steps to get there. And so whatever your goals are, whether it's success in business, success in life, or success in family, find actionable steps. And if you don't know what your goal is, you're not going to get there.
And so the first thing is people need to know what they want.
Yes.
And then they need to surround themselves with people who are going to support them achieve those goals. And then you need to remove the people around you that are not helping you achieve those goals.
That's the understatement of the week. Yeah.
These things are all simple, but simple is hard to do.
That's the understatement of the week. I sugar-coated the negative stuff, and I choose to forgive those that have said negative things about me. I'm moving forward. But you got to get away from the toxic. It just sucks the life. It's like emotional vampires.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Believing that God loves me, that God wants me to live an abundant. I believing that I was created to love and serve God and to serve others.
And it's important to come from the viewpoint of serving. Too often everybody wants what they want and they don't learn to give or to share the gratitude. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
That I really am a special person, that I can just be Boyd. I am a very unique person, but I don't have to try and be somebody else or win people's approval that are disapproving.
And we are all unique people. Each and every one of us has our own unique story and journey, and you need to embrace and celebrate it and stop trying to be somebody else who isn't you. I think that's where we end up with most of the struggle, trying to be somebody we aren't, instead of being and embracing who we are.
Yes.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Aim for the stars. If you only hit the moon, you'll still do way better than you expected.
And that's one thing. When I was a kid, we were always told that the world is yours. Go do whatever it is. We were always told that the expectation was you aimed for the stars.
Mm-hmm.
If people would like to find you and connect and learn more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
From blood cancer to the Boston Marathon is my Facebook page. From blood cancer to Boston, Instagram. From blood cancer to Boston, I think it's blood_Boston on Twitter. It's that's the easiest way to sort of sum it up. From blood cancer to Boston, you can Google Boyd Dunleavy or from blood cancer to Boston, and you'll be able to find it.
And I will put some of those links in the show notes. And I think there's also a video, right, that you sent me?
Yeah. Meeting my stem cell donor at Disney. That's a tearjerker. Just grab a Kleenex. I'm not joking.
And we will put a link to that video in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, Boyd.
Rocky, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Wow. What an inspiring story. I'm so glad that Boyd reached out to share his journey with fellow listeners. He never gives up, and I admire that. We planned the release for today, which is his 1-year anniversary of meeting his donor at Disney. How cool is that? As you listen, did you catch the real cost of free healthcare and how much taxes are? Most people couldn't afford to pay those taxes and deal with that here in the U.S. Did you hear about the ability to buy houses in Canada and how they can't get long-term mortgages? In most of the rest of the world, people don't have the ability to get a 30-year fixed mortgage. That's really something that we should be grateful for. And that's another thing that Boyd talks about. Gratitude. Count your blessings. If you're listening to this, you're in the top 1% of the world. Start being grateful for that. Gratitude has also been one of the major themes that seems to be coming up in every single episode. The question is, are you enjoying gratitude? This week's action step was believe in yourself and get around people that believe in you. After all, you are the 5 people you surround yourself with. So who are you picking to surround yourself with? It's really important to remove the negative from your life and find inspiration. I hope today we were able to provide you with a little. Next week, I've got on Jeremy Siegel to share his journey of early success in life and the lessons he's learned. Since you're still listening, I'm guessing you liked today's episode. So please share it. I would be grateful for that. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.